March 19th. It's 7 o'clock, and this is our 16th hearing on this comprehensive permit application that's been submitted to the town. We haven't met since April 21st, so nearly a month. Since that time, we've had a comprehensive or a detailed submittal by Mr. Schumer on behalf of the applicant of revised design for the site. And I know parties have also worked on the stormwater and drainage issues, which have been an important subject to this hearing. The board's intention tonight is to hear from the applicant on those matters and to take questions from those in attendance who are interested in that matter. I will tell you that I was contacted by Mr. Dan Hill, who was asked to ask questions of the applicant at this hearing, which I've consented to, as has been our norm with this hearing, just to let people know up front. I see Mr. Hill and his colleague, Ms. Baptista, are here. As also has been my custom, I've reported to the people in the audience as to what the board has received in the interim period since we last met. And the reason I do that is I know sometimes it's just hard to keep up with the webpage documentation. Other than the information that we received from Mr. Schumer, I don't know that we received any other information except for an email from Brian Johnson, who's in a abutter to the property, who was the gentleman who made the comment about the unwanted element that some may remember from a few hearings ago. I did address that both at the time and in the subsequent hearing, and the board elected to strike that language from the record, so it doesn't appear in the record. But I did want to acknowledge Mr. Johnson's email that indicated that the words were taken out of context, and he did not mean nor intend nor did he believe the use of that terminology meant anything in a derogatory or discriminatory manner. So I'll let the email speak for itself. It's been entered into the record, and I'll just calling it to people's attention in the spirit of transparency, which has been how this hearing has been conducted since December. I also report to the members that with the advent of the governor's release or the cessation of the emergency order, it could be that we'll be changing the format of these hearings. There are implications for the application of the open meeting law that the town of Milton is unpacking. So look for and please be sensitive to potential news on how that might change. I'm not being coy. I just don't know. We'll continue to meet on Wednesdays as we've planned, but it could be that we'll be in person. I don't know what the status of that is, but as soon as I know, or shortly after I know, I'll make sure that something gets posted on this website for people who are following. So that's all the housekeeping. I don't know if the members of the board have anything they want to add before I ask the applicant to make the presentation that we're expecting.
Nothing from me, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Joffa?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Terrific. Mr. Schomer, welcome to the board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good evening to
You're
you
welcome.
and to the other members. It's been a few weeks since we've seen each other. It's a beautiful evening, so we appreciate your time tonight to hear us on this matter for the second project revision that we were looking forward to presenting to you and the neighbors and members of the public. And I see also Mr. Bearden is on, so we appreciate him being here as well. Tonight, Mr. Chair and members of the board, we have a second project revision to present to you, as I mentioned. It's outlined in a letter that I filed with the board on Friday afternoon, and I'll just give a few broad strokes, and I won't steal D'Artagnan's thunder. But the second project revision, it focuses on project architecture and site layout, as well as the site drainage system and stormwater management system that has been completely revised on this plan. In terms of the architecture and the site design, the north building of the project, what's being called the north building, which is connected with the existing mansion, has been revised to change the massing of the structure around the front to provide better presentation to the house from Blue Hill Avenue. And it's been modified on the back corner as well to remove what I refer to in my letter as the bump out, which was the one of the more impactful points for the neighbors on Meeting House Lane. And the reduction to that building in mass and in size and footprint has reduced the project by an additional 6 units. So as you may recall, the initial presentation to the board was 118 units, and we're now currently at 86 units. In terms of the site layout, there's been a pretty significant redesign, and D'Artagnan and Daniel will go into that. In terms of the parking layout and moving some of the site driveways away from the property lines, reducing the size and the height of some of the retaining walls. And in terms of the site civil design, Jim Burke will go into the new stormwater system, which has been completely redesigned in accordance with what we believe in accordance with Mr. Reardon's recommendations, and now contains a significant portion of the drainage being maintained and detained in a natural detention basin at the rear corner of the site. And that would be a low impact design intended to reduce the need for subsurface drainage structures and reduce some of the impact to the site itself. So with that, I won't go any further. We look forward to presenting this tonight and look forward to the feedback from the board members and members of the public. So with that, I'll turn things over to D'Artagnan Brown. Thank you very much.
Mr. Brown.
Awesome, Jesse. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the board, again, D'Artagnan Brown, principal with Embark. Thank you all for your time tonight. We really look forward to showing you kind of an evolution in the upcoming slides. I do want to thank not only the board, but all of the peer reviewers, working with Cliff, working with a lot of input from the community. We've heard comments from Dan Hill as well and his group, and being able to, I think, really get through quite a fruitful outcome in terms of how we've been able to reposition, not only from the initial stage, but in the last round, some significant changes that we believe address a lot of the comments raised. I think with that, Daniel, if you don't mind pulling up, I'll walk through the first couple overview slides and then turn it over to Daniel from our office to walk through in more detail.
Sure thing. Oops, excuse me, just give me one moment. There we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. So essentially from the last round, what we've done, as Jesse alluded to, is by a further reduction in the massing to address comments around the north end of the north building, and then the 2-story piece that abuts the residential at the rear, we've reduced by another 7,000 square feet the gross square footage for the building. Again, that's really pulling back so we can open up the views to the historic home and then reduce the most impacted area, the 2-story wing that came off. You'll see that in the set of drawings. What's that's done is taken it from our last round of 90 units down to 86. And with that, we were able to also reduce the parking from 140 to 133. With the modifications in the rear, our buffer went from 12 feet. Now we're up at 31 feet, which is quite a substantial improvement in that area. And in addition to the front, pulling back the building, we've been able to widen the front courtyard. You'll see tonight as well, the stormwater, we understand the concerns around that, and we've been able to really heavily look at shifts to that to have an enhanced stormwater system, including a retention pond at the rear of the site with the site modifications we'll present tonight.
And sorry, D'Artagnan, but there was a typo here. It should be 92 to 86.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Sorry, thank you. Yep, so 92 to 86. And then just a quick overview on the massing. So from our Pell application in February, you can see the initial courtyard design, or so rather 2 smaller courtyards, a larger building that kind of had a middle wing. In our comprehensive permit in May 2020, we removed that middle wing to open up a larger landscape. And that's the point we really from there pivoted and shifted to preserving the historic gardens, which I think everyone is well aware of at this point, and then creating 2 structures that flanked the historic home, which is where we're at now at 86 units. And I think at that point, Daniel, if you don't mind jumping in, would be awesome.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So, so with that, just to go through the metrics, kind of get this out of the way. So, as D'Artagnan mentioned, we had reduced the mass of the building pretty substantially. So now we're at 104,000 gross square feet total for the project, which is a 0.6 FAR. We're at a 4-story building height, 133 parking spaces, and we have largely.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I'm here. I'm having difficulty hearing Daniel. It might be as simple as him getting a little bit closer to his microphone.
Sure, does that help?
A little bit, thank you.
Okay, I can call in too if that's helpful, but
Mr. O'Brien, can you hear Daniel now?
D'Artagnan, I can hear, Mr. Brown, I can hear you fine. Mr. Riggs, if you just lean a little bit into your microphone, it picks you up better, that's all.
or, yeah,
We get to
Thank
see you better, Daniel.
yeah, perfect. Does that help, Frank? Mr. O'Brien, sorry.
Yes, it does, thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. So to show you, this is our latest updated architectural site plan. So you can see here some of the changes that we've made that Jesse and D'Artagnan both mentioned. So on the north building here where my cursor is, we've reduced the massing of the building there for the entire 4 stories to allow a greater view shed into the historic building from Blue Hill Avenue. So this chunk of the building has been removed for the entirety of the height of the building there. And in the rear, as Jesse had mentioned, we've sort of removed this bump out that was on both sides of the sort of east wing of that north building. So that's largely where that 7,000 gross square feet came from. And we've also increased the rear buffer pretty significantly on the site. So it went from 12 feet to over 30 feet. And a lot of that was incorporating the peer reviewers' feedback in terms of reducing what we had previously as an orchard here adjacent to the play area. We really reduced that and allowed ourselves to push the building back, or the circulation back up as close to the building as we could. And we also reduced the length of the north building by about 6 feet in that location here to again allow that tighter turn radius of the roadway and increasing that buffer by over about 20 feet. We've also reduced the surface parking spaces and consolidated some of the open space. So the play area has now been raised to the level of the existing home to allow for full accessibility to that play area and just a more fluid experience of the outdoor space in the whole rear of the building. And Blair from Verdant will go through that in more detail later on. So here's a 3-dimensional axon drawing of our building in the context. So here you can see Blue Hill Avenue crossing through the page here. The north is down, so page down is north on this sheet. You can see Meeting House Lane in the back of the site here, Vose Hill Road. And this gives you a good sense of how we're really thinking about materiality in terms of delineating that top floor of the building, breaking up the different masses and sort of bay language within the building itself, and allowing it to sort of play within the context. Here, and you can also see that kind of wider courtyard, but with that wider courtyard, we're also presenting a smaller face of the north building to Blue Hill Avenue. And this is another axon taken from the rear of the site. Here, we're looking almost directly page north is north in the site. So here on the page is Delphi Academy, Blue Hill Avenue, Vose Hill Road, and Meeting House Lane in the rear of the site. This really emphasizes the stepping down nature of that north building to present what is really a 2-story residential building and a 1-story garage, so a total of 3-story height at the rear of the site. And we have a few context perspectives that will show this from a few vantage points as well. So we have one from Meeting House Lane that we'll get into in a second, one from Robbins Street, and one from Blue Hill Avenue and from Vose Hill Road.
Excuse me, Mr. Riggs.
Yeah.
don't ordinarily like to interrupt, but can you just speak to the level of design that you're at now and how that relates to the level of certainty with which this level of certainty you have about the renderings that we're looking at? Just in terms of some of the, is this what the project's going to look like in your opinion? Or is this an approximation of what the project will look like? And in particular, I'm thinking about the color and the exterior features and, the roof, the things that are on the roof or elements on the roof. I mean, some of the finer details. I'm just wondering what level, what degree of certainty do you have with respect to that right now at this stage?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So in this drawing, in our roof plan, we have just drawn the mechanical equipment two-dimensionally, so you don't see that modeled here. Otherwise, the building materials, we're showing that with a pretty high degree of accuracy in terms of how we would represent or how that would be in reality here. In the past in 40B projects, we've continued to work with the peer reviewer throughout the process, including through construction, in terms of reviewing material samples and actual color samples of the final products that we select for the building. So in terms of the absolute material colors, this is the direction we're going, but those absolute, samples that will become the actual building products, we generally have that reviewed by the peer reviewer even throughout the process. But yeah, this is very accurately what we were planning on developing on the site. Absolutely.
Okay.
And if I can add to that, Daniel, Mr. Chairman, towards the later half of the presentation, you'll see a series of renderings that are based upon actual products that we use. So when we lay out the windows, when we lay out the siding, it's all inputted based on actual specs for products that we would see going here.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and even from the last iteration of this process, we've refined some of the materials in coordination with the client. So, select asphalt shingles for the roofs and the vertical pieces of the mansard roof components here. So we've continued to refine that. And this iteration we're showing you right now is our intended final product.
Thank you.
Here's a site section cut from the east to the west. So here's the west building, our west building, as we were calling it, with the existing building just beyond that in this drawing, cut through the historic garden. And continuing to be cut through the rear abutter on Meeting House Lane. You can see here the kind of exposure height from Blue Hill Avenue is really about 38'6" due to the contours and the sloping down of the site from Blue Hill Avenue. And the height above this front retaining wall is about 41'5". The entire height of the structure from the slab to the top of the roof is 44'10". So that's just representing that change in grade as you go down the back. This is another site section cut from the north to the south. So this one's cutting through the north building as it connects to the existing building, as well as through the historic garden space here. And we're really attracted to and have been throughout this revision process of the way this amenity space flows out into that historic garden space here. The next few images will be going through some context perspectives. So this one is taken from Meeting House Lane, and you can see the existing tree growth, as well as the existing chimney of the house behind these trees. So to give you a sense of the relative scale of the trees that are existing in the foreground, and all the trees that are existing and shown here along the property line are off of our building's property and on either the neighboring properties here, but they're basically will continue to remain. So we've taken a chance to represent that. Obviously, the trees aren't exactly the same trees here, but they're intended to represent the similar heights and density that you see on the site. So we've taken two views of this, and I know this could be confusing. So the bottom image is really intended to be hiding all of the trees that are existing and off of our property that would be remaining. So this is just to give you a sense in the absolute middle of winter what this building might look like, and to give you a sense of the relative height from Meeting House Lane. So again, you can see here the chimneys of the existing building our new addition here, where you really see that the 3-story volume here, but in reality, the existing tree growth really covers a lot of that, a lot of the building, and sort of dominates the height from this viewpoint.
Yeah, and to reiterate, Daniel, those are trees that will be staying, that is outside of our project limits.
Absolutely, yeah. I realize the bottom image could be confusing, but we're definitely not proposing to get rid of any of those trees that are shown in this top image.
Yeah, and I think, just sorry, Daniel, just to jump in,
Yeah.
the real premise behind this, I think, sorry, I have pretty bad pollen allergies. I apologize. Mr. Chairman, is that in terms of your question around setting the actual building of what were proposed and, the reality around the framework for that, this is a layering of an image to show how we've pinned, because everything is 3D modeled in a program called Revit. All of the topography for the site is put in. The existing height of the building is a known fact off of surveys. From there, we can triangulate into our proposed building. We just want to show, when you set up a view like this, we're not just dropping it in there. It's actually scaled to a benchmark civil grade that then in the upper image, when you layer back in the trees, you can see the reality around it, which is, for us as designers is quite important to see in terms of what the actual net effect will be to the neighborhood. And because of that, rows of trees around the south edge of the property remaining in long term, that's really the screening elements with the stepping down and scaling of our buildings, that the messages for this rendering.
Absolutely. And we have the benefit of having, again, this large scale existing tree growth on the site. And we're also, as you can see in this bottom image that really just shows the plants we're proposing on our site, we're planning on adding another layer of density to the plant growth on the rear of our site. This is taken from Robbins Street. So you can't really see in this image, but you'll see it in the renderings. There's Delphi basketball court is sort of beyond this part of the screen. And that piece right there you see poking out is, again, the chimney of the existing house. So you can see the relative height difference of the existing house and the tree growth around it. And here's a series taken in the same manner of that existing view from Robin Street, looking at the project with the existing tree growth approximated here in this top image, as well as without that existing tree growth approximated, just so you get a real sense of how the building is in terms of height from the existing property, or from Robin Street as it exists now. And this is a very similar study from Bose Hill Road. So looking back at the site, really part of our whole thinking about the positioning of the west building and why we didn't want to move it further away from the garden, we feel confident in the shadow studies that the garden won't be affected seriously by the west building shadows. So we really wanted to keep that positioning so that it allowed for the existing tree buffer at Blue Hill Ave. This fourth image is taken from Blue Hill Avenue, looking north on the site. You can see that on this key on the left here. And the sort of
Oh, Daniel, I think you're frozen. Can anyone hear me?
Yes,
I can hear
D'Artagnan.
you, D'Artagnan.
Oh, okay. Daniel, I think you were frozen there for a second.
can you can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you were just getting to this image.
Sorry about this. Is the beauty of Zoom, right? I'll just start again on this image. So taken from Blue Hill Avenue, looking.
Daniel, we lost you again. I can jump in here.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that again. So Blue Hill Avenue, and this is our building as proposed, with the 35 to 40 foot exposure of the building shown here and the entry off of Blue Hill Ave. And then just to quickly go through the floor plan. So this is our garage floor plan. We've, with the reduction in massing, it's allowed us to really reduce the surface, the width of the surface road in the way that it interacts with the rear property line. We've also revised some of our utility spaces in the basement to incorporate additional bicycle storage and trash storage, as well as that clear maintenance connection at the back. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right. First floor plan. So again, it's largely the same entry pattern that we had previously. So the west building entry is off of the courtyard. We're maintaining the existing entry as it is to the house, and allowing us to do that. We have this this connection piece here between the existing building and the north building. Becomes our sort of loading entry, accessible entry. It's really the day-to-day entry to the facility there. Second floor plan, so these largely just show the mix of units, and they all stack up the building. On the third floor is where we start to step back from the rear. So this is where we start to create a setback from Meeting House Lane. The fourth floor, we continue that step back. So we bring it all the way back essentially to where the historic garden wall starts. And the roof plan here shows the anticipated condensing unit locations, as well as elevator overrun, roof access hatch, and those kind of more technical elements of the building. So again, here's our elevations for the building. So very much in keeping with how we're planning on developing this project. This is very accurate to what we're planning on developing, going as far as to color code and really call out the materials here. So lap siding throughout a majority of the building. We have some panel accent pieces, as well as these differing colors through that fiber cement lap siding to kind of break up the building mass as it moves around the building. The north elevation here, so this is cutting through the connection piece. And you can see we've strategically used brick in places where we really feel like realistically we're going to be putting brick on the building. So that really is allocated to the north building on the west side where it faces Blue Hill Ave, as well as the west building in these two flanking pieces here where it again faces Blue Hill Avenue. This is a further elevation, so the west south elevation. So this is looking at it, Blue Hill Ave will be up here, sloping down. So again, we have this kind of accent panel in the center with the two brick pieces flanking it. And the face that would be facing back to the historic garden here. We're allowing these vertical pieces to kind of segment the building and create some breaks in the facade on that side. And this is a closer in building section. So focusing on the west building itself, where it cuts through the garage. You can see the garage buried into the topography fully at this point. And then the way that the historic garden kind of terraces down towards the rear of the site. And the 4-story height of the building here with the top floor incorporated within that mansard roof structure. These are updated sun shadow study diagrams. So largely the same diagrams you had seen previously, updated with our revised massing. So I won't go into these in too much depth, but you can see our sun path diagram here that corresponds to where the shadows are taken from. So this arc here is meant to represent the path of the sun on this day. So this first slide is the summer solstice. Starting at 9 a.m., the sun is in the east. Shadows are going correspondingly away from that. Noon, very little shadow impact. 3 p.m. again from the west, going towards the east, and 6 p.m. The most shadow impact for a small period of time as it goes in that direction. Fall equinox, largely the same story, so 9 a.m. Again, you can see the change in the sun path. Noon, 3 p.m. Again, here just showing basically impact on the courtyard itself, and 6 p.m. where obviously there's the least amount of daylight at that time of year. And this is the winter solstice, where the sun is at the lowest angle, as you can see in this path diagram. So from 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. So generally the location of the garden is largely unaffected by the shadows because of the orientation of the buildings on the site. As you can see in the compass here, north is generally that direction. So the north building is really northeast, the west building is really northwest of the historic garden. And the spring equinox, again, this is very similar to the fall equinox. This is a photometrics study that we had conducted. So this was done by a third party. This was done by OmniLight, who's a vendor who will be working with us again as we continue to develop the drawings and lighting package. And what this really shows is the intensity of light on the site. It's measured in foot candles. Essentially, the higher the number, the higher the light that's shown on site. And you can see the colors here correspond to that as well. And most of this is provided for safety of the building itself, for navigating the drive, as well as entering the building and for emergency egress. And the use of daylight or dark skylighting rather, really directs most of this light down, which is why you see it happen in these kind of small pools. The majority of which do not go past to the property line, and the few exceptions, there's small spillage on the Delphi Academy property, but otherwise containing the light within our site, directing it towards the ground, and trying to minimize that impact as much as possible. And here is a rendering from Blue Hill Avenue of our revised project. So again, you can see the smaller face of the north building towards Blue Hill Ave, creating this larger view shed towards the existing home, and using some contrasting materials. So really taking the brick and using it at just this portion of the north building, and allowing a contrasting material here, in this case, a lighter fiber cement lap siding with these fiber cement accent panels, to contrast the house and let the house really stand out on its own. And this is a rear garden rendering. So this is largely the same view we had looked at previously, but taken from a lifted perspective to really see the entirety of the site, and the way that all the structures interact with the historic garden. So with that, I'll turn it over to Blair Hines from Verdant Landscape Architecture to go through the landscape architecture component.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay, very good. So in the overall landscape approach here is really based on a lot of the feedback that we had received on the site walks. The preservation of the existing mature trees and plantings along Blue Hill Avenue. And of course, the focus on the historic Shipman Garden, but also on the mansion as well. So that this has been really the main guide in terms of how we've been thinking about designing this. So the proposal is basically to have a courtyard developed between the two proposed buildings, and then to make some modifications to the patios that are to sheet bottom off the existing mansion, which is going to be the amenity space, in order to make that grade at the same elevation as the interior space, so that you have ADA access. And then the idea would be that the slope would then be to sheet left towards the historic gardens, and that at least the upper terrace would be fully accessible, and the lowest terrace would be accessible through a pathway. Another important aspect of the landscape plan was really trying to provide some, was really focusing on the residential living here. And again, we think the setting is the main feature for the residents as well. That would be a kind of a passive, almost like park area between the drop-off area and Blue Hill Avenue. And then secondly, the patio areas that are to the sheet bottom or south of the manse, which would be the outdoor amenity space for residents. And then a more contemplative setting would be in the historic gardens, where we look to make repairs and refurbish a lot of the existing plantings, which are in pretty meager condition right now. Other features that residents would have as part of their experience of the site would be this playground for the youngsters, which is, as Dan had mentioned, at the same elevation as the patio, so that would be fully accessible. So that area is actually, I think it's about 8 feet above the parking area. So whether it'll be one wall or two walls and how we're going to deal with that grading, there is some consequential grading there. But we're also able to achieve a sloped walk from the playground down to the to the parking area that is to the sheet bottom through what we're calling a little orchard concept. And if you go to the next slide. And you see to the, that's good. And you can see in the lower left, the idea is we're not thinking about this particularly as being a fruit production orchard, but rather to have flowering trees in an orchard format. So that would be a very pleasing walkway from the parking area up through the playground into the patio space, or you could go from the parking area through some steps into the lowest terrace of the Shipman Garden, and then go upstairs and continue to ascend into the patio space that's to the south of the main mansion. So that's the main focus in terms of residential living. The third important focus really was how do we mitigate the impact of the two new buildings on and parking on the adjacent residences and on the larger context of the community. And here, I think that we've been looking to preserve those large mature trees that are along Blue Hill Avenue, and some of the ericaceous rhododendrons and leucothea and azaleas, as well as move some of the ones that are within the building footprint, so that we can bulk up that area to be a very pleasing garden setting. And we think that, as Dan was pointing out in some of the perspectives, that will go most of the way to really tuck the building behind an existing landscape. Then to the periphery, along where we have their access drives, we're having linear plantings of evergreen trees along what I'm going to call sheet right, or the kind of northwest area. And then as we go towards the south or sheet bottom, again, you can see that there's a very significant number of trees that are going to be planted on what is going to be a sloped area from the existing grade that'll be, I think, within about 10 feet of the property line is where the grading starts to change. And we would be sloping up and preserving a number of the trees that are existing along the property line. And it's not entirely clear which ones are the large trees that are beyond the property line. But again, as Dan had showed well, there's a fair amount of trees that will really provide a good scale element. Because I think it can't be overemphasized that the idea of scale is really one of the key things here. By breaking up the larger building into two masses and stepping it down and maintaining a lot of these large trees, we think that the building will be a lot less impactful than the earlier plans were. I think there's one more slide too. Yeah. Oh, before you go, I forgot to mention that one of the things that we're also looking to do is that, as was indicated by Jesse when he, in his prefatory remarks, there's the proposal is to create a stormwater detention area. And we see this as an excellent opportunity to really create a habitat area by creatively landscaping it with various types of shrubs and herbaceous plants that have high habitat value for both birds and for pollinators. So that's a focus of our practice in terms of how we do planting plans on projects like this. Another element that is showing up here, as you could see, slightly to the left of the right of those 6 images of habitat plants are these very narrow growing types of trees. And there's a number of different species that can grow 30, 40 feet tall and only be 4 or 5 feet wide. And we wanted to really create a very interesting space between the existing Shipman Garden wall and the proposed building, so that that walkway, on the one side, you'll have that brick wall, which is about 7 feet tall. And then on the other side, you have the 4-story building. And we wanted to have these trees that sort of populate that space and accent the architecture, again, to create a pleasing walkway from the entry court on to the parking area that you see off to sheet left. In terms of the parking area itself, I think there's on the next sheet, I think we have some a little more thoughts on that.
I only have the 2 sheets. Sorry, Blair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well then I can explain it. So we're thinking about the parking court as consisting of several different types of paving. We wanted to basically define this kind of circular area, drop-off area. But beyond that, to have sufficient space so that emergency vehicles can turn around, and also that, if there are UPS and Amazon or, more in the post office, you have 2 or 3 delivery vehicles, that there's enough room that they can all both park and deliver their packages as well as maneuver around it. And we're considering the idea of having some kind of a planting in the center. We also had some schemes that basically had the entire area paved. And one thing that's important to note here is that this drop-off area is in fact over the garage. So it's a really very efficient way of developing the site, which is to take this area that would otherwise just be a building and to make it function as this drop-off area. And then you can see there are some trees to sheet bottom of the drop-off area as well as to the top, and those trees are all located just off the podium structure. I think that's pretty much. I'd be happy to answer more questions that people might have as we get into the discussion portion of this and get into some more detail, but that's our presentation.
From there, Blair, let's turn things over to Jim Burke to go into the stormwater, if we could.
Before we do that, Mr. Schomer, I wonder if it might be a little bit more efficient to take questions on the design before we move off the design.
Certainly.
Be all right?
Yes, that's as is the board's pleasure.
What's the board's pleasure?
To whatever the board
No, I'm
prefers.
not asking you. I'm asking the board what its pleasure is.
I think that makes sense, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Jaffer?
I agree.
Okay, I have one question, and it's with respect to the landscape architecture. So this is a helpful rendering. We just leave it up on the screen. As I understand it, this perimeter road along the north, the east and the south side of the property will be elevated for most of its length. My question is what will that look like from the various elevations and from the yard, if you will, the remaining yard? That's the first question. The second question is, how do you get there?
Believe you're on.
Are you speaking about how would you get from the building to the lower areas of the site?
Yeah.
I see. Well, I think we would have some steps to go down there, or at least an opening in there for maintenance and for, people who might want to, go down that area. We don't expect that that's going to be a particular focus of residential living here. We see that as primarily buffering of the development.
I guess that's my question, and I wonder, if that's fair. I mean, that's your proposal, but if that's the proposal, we ought to know that. In other words, this is not intended for active recreational space.
Absolutely.
It's buffer. These are your words, not mine. I don't mean to be telling you what to do, but I want to understand it because, first of all, I think it may matter what it looks like. But secondly, my guess is if it's not easy to get to and it's not large it's not going to be used and will become a bit of an orphan, it ought to be designed that way.
That's thoughtful comments, and it is being designed that way. We're proposing primarily evergreen plantings that would be naturalizing. We're not thinking about putting a lawn in there, but more of a meadow planting. And that over, although we would certainly expect maintenance to be happening there to take care of the plantings, there would be some transitioning of native shrubs and other plants that would start to migrate in there. And then maintenance would consist of removing invasive plants like, bittersweet and things like that, which are just around the property as well as just off the property. So it would be getting tended to by ownership, but it's not really intended in any way to be an area where the residents would be going. It's not going to be fenced off, but we wouldn't expect that there would be any significant amount of visitation, let's call it, from the residents into that area.
I see. And then lastly, not that this needs to be addressed tonight, but I appreciate Mr. Riggs's perspectives. Not his perspective, the perspectives that he showed. I think it would be helpful to see what that wall looks like from the property lines. There's going to be a wall, right?
Yes, it is a wall.
Oh,
Sorry, let me try to locate that. I believe you're referring to, yeah, so this wall here is.
that wall, yeah, that's just difficult to see. That's all.
You mean in terms of actual materiality?
No, I remember in the site visit that the folks, in that neighborhood, I mean, that was a particular point of interest for them, So I think it would be helpful to pay attention to it.
Yeah, so we're representing some of those taller kind of evergreen trees that Blair had mentioned during his presentation. He might be disappointed in how they're rendered in this view, perhaps, but the intention is that there's a whole outgrowth of those, as well as these lower plantings that help to take up that entire area between the property line and that wall, and help to largely mask that wall.
Fair enough.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. O'Brien.
it also gets into the comment that you made earlier relative to finishes, textures, colors, that sort of thing. I understand that the rendering that was provided is just that, a rendering, but I just also think that bears mention and reflects back on the comment you made earlier relative to the finishes, colors, et cetera, on the larger proposed building as well.
Yeah. Frank, please proceed if you have any other questions. I'm all set.
I'm through for the moment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Joffer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one question, and it's, I guess, from one direction, it's about the symmetry of the design, and then also, I guess, from the perspectives, which are very useful, to sort of try to put yourself in the position of if you're in a butter what you're looking at. There seems to be sort of there is this part of the building that just goes just past the garden, right? It's, if we can look at it like a sort of an aerial view of the design.
Yeah, let me find a better view. Sorry about that. Just go through here. Give me one moment. Is that more helpful?
It is. So if you look at the tree line, so if you're position yourself on Meeting House Lane and then you're looking at, there's a tree line, you can see there's a parking lot, then there's another tree line just bordering the garden. If you follow that line up, then there's this sort of extra, what I'm going to call extra, but it's the part of the building that goes beyond the gray top floor.
This piece here.
Yes, exactly. I don't know how you're referring to that, But I'm just wondering how many units are in that space, which, like, from a design perspective, like, feels like an add-on to me. But really, my question is how many units are in there?
We're counting right now.
Okay, sure.
Do you want me to look, Daniel?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No, no problem.
And maybe sort of more big picture, what I'm trying to assess is, you know, what is gained in terms of units versus it seems like a lack of symmetry and also sort of increased building view for the neighbors.
Sorry, just bear with us.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
We have 10 units in that section of the building.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions?
No, thank you. Not for me.
Okay, maybe we ought to finish with the applicant's presentation so before we open up the questions to the balance of the attendees. Does that work for you, Mr. Schomer?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. Well, we'll turn it over to Jim Burke to talk about site civil.
Mr. Burke.
Good evening, everyone. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So we've done a decent amount of work since the last time we've talked, and a lot of work even when we started talking. You're looking at the existing conditions plan right now, and those red dots that you can kind of see there are all the soil exploration that we've done across the site. Just to give you an idea of, the continued effort to determine soils and groundwater elevations for the property to help us with the design. You want to click it down to maybe the layout? Next sheet. So this is our layout with showing the garage. It's like 31,850 square feet footprint, showing how the existing house will sit in that footprint along with the garden. You also can show it shows the layout of the drive, the 20-foot wide drive as it wraps around the building with the I think 53 surface spaces around the building. One of the concerns on the site walk was how the access was too close to Delphi Academy, and you can see how far off the road is, the driveway is off of that side property line now. And that's the way it was originally designed as well. And we do have a sidewalk that kind of leads out adjacent to that to Blue Hill Ave as well. We can go to the next one. This is the layout showing how the surface buildings are sitting along with the existing building that was refurbished, and it has the turnaround. The turnaround has an interior radius of 12.5, I want to say, and an exterior radius of 31.5. It's really kind of designed for, like I say, deliveries and drop-offs and that kind of thing. We've also provided to the north of that curb cut along the access drive another like kind of a larger drop-off, for delivery vans and honestly too could be used as a fire lane as well. But just a nice area, a large area for pull off and access, quick access into the building. Next slide. Yep.
If I may, okay, now I see it. In my initial review of the landscape plan, I didn't see that, but now I see it. It's kind of gray. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Keep going.
Next slide. So this is our grading plan. And I wanted to jump into that conversation you were having about the rear retaining wall. That rear retaining wall is about, for that entire length of the back until it gets towards the detention basin, which we'll discuss in the future, is about 2 feet high. And in some instances on that curve, we probably can eliminate it entirely and maybe alter the grading ever so slightly. The wall has been significantly reduced. We have a 3-to-1 slope leading up from the property line to allow Blair to kind of work his magic in the landscaping end of things. But the retaining wall has significantly been reduced in that area. And the same can be said for along the northerly property line as well. The retaining wall gets to be its highest at the detention basin, and it's about 13 feet in that location. So you can see how the contours from the east side towards Meeting House Lane kind of disappear into the wall. And that's an indication of where the wall grows its largest height. We do have still the 2% leveling areas at each access and egress driveway. Then it comes down to a maximum of 8% that leads to the rear of the parking lot, which comes across at 1%. Next slide. So here's, kind of the revised stormwater management. You're looking at the dark blue areas are the infiltration system. So, and the light blue are the detention basins. The one to the north, the northeast corner, is the surface detention basin within the wetland buffer. There's a light blue square kind of centrally located just above Meeting House Lane, maybe a little bit to the south of it is an underground concrete chamber that also is going to be used as detention. The darker blue areas that you're looking at are strictly related to infiltration, and they are sized to meet the stormwater management standards for that purpose solely. Now, for water quality, we've included, I think we've got 3 proprietary CDS contact structures, and they're designed, their purpose in life is just to remove sediment and pollutants from the stormwater. So what we had originally designed was more of, single retention, detention structures that also provided water quality. And now we kind of just spread the wealth around to everything, individualizing the structures to do their jobs, in a more individual manner. We provided the correct amount of separation of groundwater, I believe, and the surface detention basin is. I haven't designed one in a while. It was certainly it is a nice feature, and I agree with Blair. You have an opportunity here to landscape it with creating a habitat that kind of fits into the environment, and it ends up being a feature, a benefit to the site as well. We meet the peak flows off site. We're proposing a hard connection to Meeting House Lane. We're proposing an outfall into the intermittent stream. So we kind of, instead of concentrating on, trying to get everything into Meeting House Lane area and protecting the intermittent stream, we kind of spread the wealth around the site. At that, I would open up to questions that you may have. I'm certainly have several.
Ms. Joffer?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Put this in context for me.
Sure.
As a lay person, how does this differ at the 10,000 foot level from the prior proposals? What makes this the latest and greatest?
It allows, instead of kind of point loading all the stormwater into a couple of locations, we're kind of spreading it around now. You'll see like a long blue square at towards the top of right below the southerly building. That's strictly all that does is collect stormwater and recharge it into the ground, and it recharges 0.35 inches of rainfall, and then it runs off and is detained in the underground tank. That's what those blue squares represent. That's all their job is. Before, we had chambers that were infiltration chambers that were a lot larger. That is only the top one there is a C100, which is only has a 12-inch depth. We were using, I think, 330s, which have a 3-foot depth. And the difficulty with that was the grading, and we got to work, and that helped reduce the size of the wall. So we cut down the profile, we spread it across the site, and kind of reduced the grading. So instead of just kind of point loading a couple of locations, we spread it around to 6 locations, if you will. And then did a surface detention basin and an underground detention basin that do nothing but that. So we individualized the jobs as opposed to combining them into less structures. And I like this design too.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Not really.
Okay.
Okay, so I am not an engineer, but if I'm an abutter here and I'm hearing phrases like we're going to spread the wealth and it's going to go in a lot of other different directions, then given everything that I've heard during the course of this entire hearing, I'm getting a little concerned that I may start to get water where I hadn't had water before, or I may start to get more water where I have water. My problems are going to get worse.
Well,
So help me understand how this is going to solve the problem and put it in English.
So, the problem was solved originally as well. There was some.
Well, I beg to disagree, because, and I don't want to be argumentative, but I entirely disagree with what you just said. To me, nothing seemed to be settled. Nothing seemed to work. It's as a consequence, that's why we've had a number of iterations. So you have to help me understand how this works.
Okay. So the stormwater management guidelines have certain specific criteria that we have to meet. The first one is, the second one is the detention features. We have to detain, we cannot have any sort of increased flow off-site that would cause flooding impacts to downgrade property, wetlands, or abutters and the like. Okay. Right?
Gotcha.
All right. So when you add impervious area to a site, you're going to increase the flow off-site. So when you do that, and we are doing that, when you do that, you have to grab that water, control it, and detain it. Now, the light blue structures that are in the northeast corner, surface detention basin, and we didn't have that before, and the underground concrete structure located centrally, those are detention basins. So what they do is they take all the water as fast as the conveyance system can take it and put it into that tank. And then inside those structures is a control structure that releases stormwater in a slower fashion that is being gathered. So you'll have a structure in there, for example, in the concrete structure, you'll have a vertical 24-inch HDP pipe that is attached to the wall vertically in the tank. In the bottom of that pipe will be cored, I think, a 4-inch orifice, if I'm not mistaken. Now that 4-inch orifice is being fed on both sides of that tank by 12-inch pipes. Okay, so the flow coming in faster than it's being released. So that tank's going to fill up. And then the 4-inch orifice is designed to release the storm water at a rate that's less than what was modeled in the existing conditions. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does. And thank you for that. And it leads me to the second question. So the stormwater is being released at a lesser rate than what's coming in, which is what the mechanism, what the structure is designed to do.
Correct.
Where is the water going that is being released from that structure?
That water is being, in that particular tank, that's being tied into the Meeting House Lane drain pipe that is leading to on the site that connects up to the existing catch basin on Meeting House Lane.
Okay, so it's going to add additional flow into the catch basin that is going to, and the drain pipe, which is going to go down the middle of Meeting House Lane. And if I read your report correctly, and believe it or not, even though I may not be asking the most enlightened questions, I did read the report. I cannot suggest to you that I understood
Well, that's on me.
50 or 80% of it, but according to your report, the sewer pipe in the middle of the drainage pipe in the middle of Meeting House Lane is of sufficient size to handle the additional flow, correct?
It is actually, yes.
And that was confirmed via inspection?
It has not been confirmed yet. That'll be subject to peer review. There was, right now, that particular drain pipe does not have a significant amount of inflow coming into it.
Well, how do we know that if it hasn't been inspected? Help me understand that.
Well, you have to understand that right now what's connected to that drain pipe, apart from our particular site, it is a catch basin that's at the top of the road, an up gradient. So all the what that catch basin does is it just captures the runoff from our site. So
okay,
it's
but help me understand that the rest of the drainage pipe that goes down the Meeting House, has the rest of the drainage pipe that goes down the middle of Meeting House Lane, has anyone inspected that and made a determination of what its condition is?
I have not inspected it, no.
Were you planning on inspecting it?
I was not, but we certainly can.
Well, I have to wonder why it's not wasn't being planned to be inspected until I asked, given the information that we had received in previous hearings from abutters later on down the bottom of the hill regarding problems that they have had in previous years where sewage and other things have backed up onto their property. Doesn't that just seem like something that would be done as a normal course?
I think you're mixing the sewer and the drain together a little bit. But
okay, help me understand how I'm mixing my apples with my oranges.
Well, there was a gentleman at the corner that had an issue with sewage backup that was addressed. He
Mr. Gallagher. That's Mr. Gallagher.
Mr. Gallagher, and that's something related to the sewer issue, not drainage. Now, the people that have the flooding were typically the people along the stream in the back. We walked that. That's on kind of away from Meeting House Lane. That floods it with the people that had the soccer balls and all the sporting equipment that kind of floated down from Delphi Academy. That is a flooding issue that occurs. And there's also a flooding issue that runs, what's the name of that brook in the back of Alfred?
Pine Tree Brook.
It's not Pine Tree, but either way, it does. That's where the flooding problem is as well. So the capacity of the pipe that leads down Meeting House Lane, believe it or not, there's not a lot of drainage going into that except for our property. That gets captured into that catch basin, and we're connecting up to it. And we're connecting up to it after we put it into an infiltration system and detention. So as required by stormwater management guidelines, we're reducing the peak flow off the site and thereby lessening the flow in that pipe. And that's why I wasn't that concerned with the flow going down the street. Now, there is another issue with regards to the overall system and the like. And talking to Chase Berkeley, he provided a lot of data to me to analyze the system that goes all the way up to Brush Hill Road and goes to the intermittent stream and goes down Meeting House Lane and the other adjacent streets that eventually tie into the outfalls that lead to that brook. And we're working on an analysis to see how this particular project benefits those pipes. Those pipes are the ones that are flooding. It's the ones that collect everything and lead to that brook. Those are the problems. Now, we can't fix that, but we can certainly not make it worse. And that's what, in the end, is what we have to show.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. I have several more questions for Mr. Burke, but I also am mindful of the fact that I've asked several. So I don't know if any other members of the board have additional questions that they might want to ask based upon some of the questions I've asked already.
Ms. Jaffer?
No, I cede my time to Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah. I'm going to do the same. It's called Trout Brook.
Oh, Trout Brook, there you go. Yep.
Please proceed, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for answering my questions, Mr. Burke. One of the other things that you mentioned during the course of your discussion a couple minutes ago, I believe that you mentioned something about some additional amount of the outfall from the site going into the intermittent brook. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a surface detention basin that has an outfall that leads towards the brook, yes.
Okay.
Towards the intermittent stream.
Is that a change from prior? Help me recollect. Is that a change from prior?
Absolutely, because I was trying to avoid work in the 100-foot buffer. We thought that I thought the naturalized buffer over in that area along the brook would be a benefit to both the abutters and the site itself. But as the project started to get reviewed it just seemed like I was trying to put too much retention and detention in too small of a location, and it was overburdening the grading, and the systems themselves were too large for the site to handle in the point loaded locations that I had, and we had the advantage of that low spot. That is kind of the lowest spot on the site, and generally that's where you'd like to put your surface water containment and control and management. So I took a look at it, and with the suggestion of peer review, and it works. It's a nice feature that, like I said earlier, that could be a benefit to the site. So now the site has two divides. There's a divide that goes to Meeting House Lane, and then the divide that goes to the intermittent stream. I was going to try to originally keep a lot of the storm water away from the intermittent stream, but at the same time, as after talking to Chase Berkeley, that water kind of gets down to Trout Brook no matter what, and that seems to be more of a flooding issue for the town than anything else. So we tried to design to use the entire site as opposed to concentrating on the Meeting House Lane section.
Regarding the flow that's going through that catch basin to the intermittent stream, are there similar retention, detention structures as we previously discussed for the flow that would be going into the intermittent stream? Is it free flowing, or is it, as you described previously, goes into a structure and then gets released more slowly?
No, it's right now, the release is out of a outlet control structure. That one is a concrete, more or less, let's say a manhole, round manhole with an orifice that I think also is a 4-inch. That'll be set at grade. So this structure will be set in the ground with I think at least 2 feet into the earth for stability. And then the 4-inch orifice will be cored at the surface. And that'll be the inlet control to the outlet, the inlet to the outlet control, if you will. So that 4-inch orifice controls the flow leaving the site. And what leaves out of the back of that outlet control structure is a 12-inch HDPE pipe with, I believe, it's a 12 or a 15, with a flared end and a rip-wrap apron at the on the down gradient side of the detention basin. And that's the outfall for the release for the detention basin.
So is it slowed or not slowed?
It is slowed, yes.
Okay, thank you. Similar to my question regarding the drainage line, the sewer line, whatever you want to call it, down the middle of Meeting House Lane.
Yes, sir.
You know, to my untrained eye, that intermittent stream is not particularly large. Have you done any measurements, or have you formed an opinion professionally that it has sufficient capacity to handle the additional flow that you're planning?
I did not. By my trained eye, it has a significant amount of capacity, believe it or not, at the gradient that it's at, as well as the size of the channel itself can handle a significant amount of flow. But as stated earlier, the flow coming off the site, off our site, is, I have the numbers here. So an intermittent stream on a 100-year event going off our site, going to the intermittent stream for a 100-year event is 7.29 CFS. And we are releasing 4.22 CFS once the development is built. So the volume that relieves the site is going to be detained on site and released at a lesser rate, allowing upgradient flow to go past it and allow the channel to operate more efficiently, as well as, this water is going to be detained on our site and reduce the flow going into Trout Brook. And that's the analysis Chase Berkeley was looking for, that you guys don't have that.
So to summarize, while you have not made any measurements or taken any measurements regarding the capacity of the intermittent stream, it's your position that the control mechanisms that you're putting on site are sufficient size that they will slow the outflow from the property down, and as a result, a lower amount of flow over a longer time means that the intermittent stream has sufficient capacity.
Correct.
Notwithstanding the fact that you haven't made any calculations concerning the capacity of the stream.
Correct. The fact that I'm reducing the flow into it, there hasn't been any evidence of the intermittent stream overtopping its bounds in that particular area, in that gradient. It seems to, when it goes into that 48-inch pipe down at the bottom, that's where it seems to expand out of the bank. And that could be an inlet control issue. If you remember that trash grate that was in front of it, that in the DPW guys are aware of it. The amount of stuff that's coming down there is something that needs to be cleaned up and reduced. As soon as that trash grate gets, blocked up, you'll have backup. But from our perspective, and from my perspective, the the reduction in flow to the intermittent stream allows it to operate more effectively because of our design. And therefore, the analysis of that particular swale doesn't need to be done. However, if it's a flow depth analysis that you're looking for, that we certainly can take that into consideration and take care of that.
Well, I may not sound like it, but I am mindful of telling other people how to spend their money. So we'll hold off on that for a moment. But I would suggest to you that given the importance and the concern with which the abutters have approached the drainage issues, I'm finding a little disconnect here. In more water is going into that. Perhaps it's going in a little bit more slowly. And I'm basically hearing you suggest that it's going to be. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. We may not have a problem until it gets down to that corrugated drainage pipe. And that's a particular area where it spreads out a little bit more. But I'm also, and I'm going to admittedly put words in your mouth, I almost hear you saying it's not our problem.
I can certainly say that we are going to assist in solving that problem. Well, maybe not solve, but manage it a little bit more effectively.
All right, thank you. And this is my last set of questions, and it goes into the new drainage basin, if you will, on the lower right-hand corner of it. And I noted that almost from the beginning of the discussion on some of the site civil issues, you have suggested that it was a priority to stay out of that particular area because of its potential impact on wetlands. Isn't that correct?
I'd say that the priority for me staying out of there was to allow the 100-foot buffer to be maintained. As far as the protection to the wetlands, there are certain performance standards that we need to do to make sure that the wetlands are protected from the work that we're doing within the jurisdictional area of the Conservation Commission, and we are accomplishing that.
What will this particular basin look like? Are we talking about basically a hole in the ground? Are we talking about a hole in the ground with riprap and other stones or whatnot to assist in drainage? Help me understand what this is going to look like.
Generally, the way I would like it to look, it will have some riprap at the inlet and the outlet. There'll be a riprap apron across the top for an emergency overflow if, heaven forbid, we have a storm event that doesn't allow this, that overfills the basin. But it's going to be vegetated with, I would say, and Blair's probably better explaining this, but he said there was going to be some shrubs and plantings that would provide habitat. I would imagine some sort of like a grass, a sedge, that would grow to a certain height. It wouldn't look like a golf course lawn. Let's put it that way, and it would be naturalized, if you will.
How deep?
The flow depth for the 100-year storm event is 3.5 feet. The top of the berm is at 95. The bottom of the basin is at 90. So you'll have a 5-foot berm with a 1.5 feet of freeboard to the top for the 100-year event.
Does it need to be fenced?
Not in my opinion, but it's given the site should be fenced. Let's put it that way. I'm not a huge fan of putting fences on top of detention basins, but maybe at the limit, given the location next to Delphi Academy, the perimeter certainly should be fenced.
I would be concerned about it being a potential hazard.
Understood. And the thing is, just to keep that in mind, you know, they drain quickly. It's meant to be dry in a sense that it fills up, detains, and drains dry. So it won't have any standing water in it at any time, other than storm events.
Now, similar to the earlier questions I've asked, how does it drain and where's it go?
It drains through that outlet control structure we talked about earlier, with a 4-inch orifice at the base. And then it has, for larger storm events, it has another orifice above that at a higher elevation in the same structure.
And it goes where?
And it goes to the intermittent stream.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be clear about that.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any additional questions at this time, and I thank you and my fellow board member for humoring me during the course of this exposition into drainage.
Welcome. You're welcome. I have one comment. I'm going to hand it back to Mr. Schumer. I think you said, Mr. Burke, that the perimeter wall was 2 feet.
Yeah, so it runs 2 feet along the rear. It goes to 13 feet at the basin, and then it runs back up and runs around like 4 feet, disappears, and then goes 2 to 4 feet up to the front.
Looked like it was more than 2 feet on those elevations that we saw. So let's just, if you could just clarify that, not tonight. I think we need to move on. Mr. Hill specifically asked for some time, and I granted it to him. So I'd like to move the hearing, but I do make that point. Mr. Schumer, is there anything else?
Just one comment from myself, Mr. Chair, and this may be hopefully in response to some of the comments of Mr. O'Brien and the questions he was having regarding the drainage system. One thing that I would point out that hasn't been mentioned tonight is that this change, by putting work within the 100-foot buffer zone, that means that this project is now required to file a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission, which means that it will be subject to oversight by Mass DEP. So part of the challenge, I think, for zoning boards and for members such as yourselves, is that the comprehensive permit process is really asking you to be not only the zoning board, but also the planning board, the select board, the Conservation Commission, and every board that issues local permits. But this project change really now puts a second level of review for this drainage system in particular. And what I would say also is, you know, in terms of Mr. Burke's opinion as a professional architect, that will be subject to peer review as well during the Conservation Commission process. And it won't be a matter of Jim offering his opinion regarding his professional expertise on this system. He'll have to prove it, basically. He'll have to prove it to the Conservation Commission that this system that he's designed meets the stormwater management standards. And if it doesn't meet the stormwater management standards, this project can't happen, period. If we don't reduce the flow off-site, the rate of flow off-site based on the existing condition and the increase in impervious surface, the project can't happen. And he will be required to prove that to the Conservation Commission and to DEP. So I would just ask that be kept in mind. And with that, I would turn things back over to the board. Thank you very much.
I'm mindful of that. I was going to ask what your schedule is for dealing with the Concom.
Well, that's to be determined. Typically, we would file for the notice of intent towards the end of the comprehensive permit process. Obviously, it's somewhat different in this case because as the project was initially proposed, it did not include any work within the 100-foot buffer zone. Yeah. So I think the plan is to be filing, Jim, what would you say within the next month or two, if this proposal that we're designing here is moving forward?
Yeah, I'd love to get a peer review letter from Mr. Reardon to see what his comments are, and you know, and I'm sure he'll have at least a couple. And I'd like to see where that leads me. And once we have addressed his concerns, we could jump right into notice of intent. But we can certainly start the application process and be ready to file. You know, as soon as I have Mr. Reardon's letter and revisions as necessary.
Fair enough. We have Mr. Reardon's in attendance tonight. I wasn't expected to make comments, but I did want him to hear this testimony. So we'll hear from Mr. Reardon at the appropriate time, and he just heard that point. So I think that's a good point. Let me also make the point that Mr. Zawinski, if you could alert the Conservation Commission to the fact that there'll be an application for an order of conditions was submitted in connection with this project. I think they'd be interested in hearing that, and let's make sure that the Conservation Commission has the opportunity to participate in this hearing to the extent that they want to. They were active in another hearing that I heard under 40B some years ago. So that it's just a side note, but back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I've included the chair of the Conservation Commission in all of my communications that I've had with other town departments and boards. So you know, they've gotten all these materials, but I will make it my business first thing tomorrow to flag this for them so that they can you know, ready themselves for that application coming in.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Schomer.
That's all from us. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hill. Ms. Batista.
Good evening. Caitlin Baptista from Hill Law here tonight representing abutters to the project. Although we haven't had an opportunity to do a thorough review of the new plans, we did have some high-level comments that we wanted to get in sooner rather than later. So if the board is okay with it, I'd like to turn it over to our engineer, John Chessa. And then we also have Scott Horsley here, who is a hydrologist who'd like to make some comments as well.
Absolutely. Mr. Chessa, welcome to the board. Welcome back to the board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the first thing, maybe, I don't know if they could share the plan on the screen or not, but the first point I guess I wanted to make, the garage, which is an underground garage below the building. So if we look at the civil engineering sheet, the grading sheet, I believe that is sheet 5 or 6.
Next one. Keep going.
Okay.
Oh, that's it.
So that underneath, so basically underneath the west side, there's a garage. The garage is excavated down about between 13 and 15 feet. The closest test pit to that area had groundwater 2 feet down. So you're going to be in, so at that location, it's about a 12 feet of cut into the seasonal high groundwater table. And that garage extends, of course, across pretty much the whole width of the lot. And so you're going to be intercepting groundwater, which needs to go somewhere, but there's nothing on the plan that shows how any of that would be handled. I think that's a significant issue. It's similar to another project being worked on in Milton with a 40B over on Canton Ave, similar issues. The groundwater's got to go somewhere. And otherwise the garage is going to be damp and, you know, you just can't have that type of a situation. As you look at that building, the west side, and you go to the south of it, there's an infiltration system very close to the garage foundation wall, certainly within 10 feet or less. It's probably like 2 or 3 feet. They have a base of that with the base of the system as an elevation of 120 and the garage floor is 111. So where's that water going to go other than either into the garage or into the drain around the garage, which means the infiltration system really isn't going to work at all. It violates DEP requirements for setbacks. It's also about the same distance off the existing brick wall to the garden, which to dig it would be a problem. If they're building this project at all during somewhat of a higher groundwater season, you'd have massive dewatering issues. It would be a construction nightmare. And where's all that water going to go when you're completely surrounded, by developed sites and, residential homes, people living in? I think it's a significant issue that the board needs to, address, think about. The design should incorporate what's going to be done, how that's going to be addressed, how that's going to be handled. And I think the infiltration system between is not permittable in compliance with the DEP handbook, which I'm pretty familiar with. That's pretty much how I make my living, is reviewing projects like this from multiple municipalities as well as private parties. So I think that's a pretty significant issue to be dealt with. When you go to the other side near the open basin, as Mr. Burke stated, the wall there is pretty high. I think it's like 12, 13 feet high. Again, you got an infiltration system underground, very close to the retaining wall. The bottom of the infiltration system is around 105.8. The wall at the proposed finished grades around 100. So the water's going to break out through the wall. I mean, they don't have any details on how these walls are going to be constructed, what they're made out of, how they're going to work. And that high of a wall, typically if it's one of the modular block walls, it has reinforcing that goes back into the slope. It may not be compatible. That it just may not work at that location. I think there's a significant issue with that. It's a very tight site in terms of construction. It's a little less tight than it might have been before, but there really isn't any room to work. They're trying to save every, tree in the front, so that's not a staging area. The garden can't be damaged. That's not a staging area. How are you going to work this, especially if you do it during any sort of springtime? You're going to have high groundwater. You're going to have problems, and you got no place to put anything. It's going to be extremely difficult. On the construction end, if you look at the south side by Meeting House Lane, and maybe go to the next sheet, please, down to, I think it's sheet 6. Yes. So the connection to Meeting House Lane, that pipe needs to be replaced. According to the report, it's collapsed. So they'll have to replace that pipe. Then, if you can follow on the plan, I know it's very small, there's a pipe essentially parallel to the property line and, just a few feet off based on the size, manholes, it's probably like 2-3 feet off the property line, at most 4. So you're going to excavate all of this to put in a pipe. And what's that going to do to those trees that they're showing in all the landscape plans to be saved? When you dig up all the roots, you probably kill the tree, especially if it's a mature tree. There doesn't seem to be there's a disconnect between what you have to do here and what you're trying to save. They're going to replace the drain. I believe they're going to replace some of the sewer, but that's mostly on the site. I'm not sure if they're doing anything in there, but there's going to be excavation all through that area to replace those pipes, which is going to damage the trees. And if they're big trees and it digs up half the roots, I'm not a landscape architect, but I did go to forestry school for a while. I have a pretty fair sense that's going to probably damage the trees. Lastly, I want to thank Mr. O'Brien. I totally agree. There should be an analysis of the pipe system it's being tied into and the stream system that's being tied into. The stormwater analysis basically is just a box that covers the property line. It doesn't cover the whole brook. It doesn't cover the whole pipe system. We know from what's out there looking at the site today, most of the land just slopes off and the runoff is going to just flow off in sort of a sheet flow pattern all along the property line. Some discharges towards the brook, some discharges towards Meeting House Lane. I would bet very, very little, if any, gets caught in that catch basin at the top of the cul-de-sac. I would say a lot of it goes through other yards. Maybe removing that's a benefit to some of the neighbors, but you're now putting it into a pipe that may be big enough to take it at the upper end, but we don't know what's going on down the lower end and how it all interconnects. And I think that's an important analysis. In addition, this stormwater systems are designed for a 100-year storm. And a pipe system in a road is generally not designed for a 100-year storm, especially a road built in like the 60s, I believe. So when you add that flow from a 100-year storm piped directly into it, there can be downstream impacts, and it can create problems where you don't expect them. So I think the analysis needs to see what's happening realistically through that pipe and what happens to the people at the foot of the hill. I'm sure it can take it at the top of the hill. And similarly with the brook, if there's an increase in the total volume of flow to the brook and there's a restriction downstream, that restriction is going to back up and there would be more flooding off-site somewhere else. We're at the top of the side slope of the hill with this project, but the people down below are the ones that are impacted, and they could be the ones not directly abutting, but further down the hill. Those are pretty much the main points I wanted to put before the board, and I appreciate you allowing me the time to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire. Ms. Batista.
I just want to jump off one point that John made. Given the constraints for the construction site, I know the applicant has requested that they not be required to do a construction management plan during this hearing and defer that to a later date. But we would respectfully request that the board do ask that they create that construction management plan now. And if Mr. Horsley can be added to the panel, I don't think he's on yet. He also has a couple of comments about the hydrology of the site.
Mr. Horsley.
It doesn't look like he's added to the panel.
He hasn't been added to the panel yet, Mr.
I just added him. Thank you.
Mr. Horsley.
Now can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you for adding me. Yes, I have just 5 additional comments to Mr. Cheshire. And my first one is that with the redesign, the project is now within the jurisdiction of the Mass Wetland Regulations and another program that I don't believe was discussed tonight, but it's a really important one, perhaps one of the most important water quality programs in the country, and that's the US EPA Mass DEP MS4 program and permit, which Milton is under. And Milton has a stormwater bylaw, which is required under that program. Relative to that, Jim Burke mentioned tonight that he thought it would be good to have the project stay out of the buffer zone. I'm paraphrasing, Mr. Burke, I apologize, but essentially that's, I think, what you said. But then you continued and you said, however, the project was too large for the site to handle the stormwater. I think that tells us a lot, but let me go on to comment number 2. And that is, the project now proposes 5 infiltration basins and a detention pond. Mr. Burke mentioned he hadn't designed one in a long time. When Mr. O'Brien asked some very good questions about where does it go from there, and trying to put it in plain English, which is important in a public hearing. Thank you for asking that question that way, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Burke replied about orifices at a couple different levels from the basin. What he didn't mention is that it probably also infiltrates and recharges. I don't know that it's lined. Maybe it is lined, doesn't show on the plans. If it's not lined, part of the answer is it recharges as well. And I'm not sure that's been handled in their calculations. Point number 3. Now, the site includes a lot more impervious surface over existing conditions. That means when it rains, more stormwater gets generated. Now, as the engineers have said, they're reducing peak surface runoff rates with these storms. So what we need to think about is, where is that extra water going? There's more surface runoff with more impervious surfaces, and they're reducing surface water discharge from the site. Where does the extra water go? I know the answer to that. The answer is it goes into the ground, recharge. And point number 4 is if you look at the revised engineering report, what it will tell you, and I will point this out and include their table in my comment letter, that the groundwater recharge rates that are proposed for this site are approximately double existing recharge rates. They have 6 infiltration sites. They have the detention basin, and in virtually all of them, the proposed recharge rates are about double the existing recharge rates. That means that the water table, the groundwater system, is going to come up. It's going to come higher. And that's going to create not only issues with compliance with minimum vertical distances, but it's going to alter the hydrology of the site and the adjacent wetland. And I'll provide more details on that. I will also assert that this violates the Milton stormwater bylaw, which says recharge rates have to be maintained. And the reason Milton did that is because that's what they have to do under the Clean Water Act as part of the MS4 program. They have to protect the, as it's called, the waters of the United States, which are regulated under the Clean Water Act. And that's part of the MS4 permit, which we did not hear discussed tonight, but it's an important part of this project and it is not able to be waived because it is a state and federal requirement. My last comment, Mr. Chairman, is number 5. And that is relative to groundwater mounding. The applicant did submit in their stormwater report, or as they call it, their engineering report, groundwater mounding. And groundwater mounding, just for everybody's benefit, is what happens when you put more infiltration or recharge into the ground. As I said before, the water table comes up. So the groundwater mounding analyses that were provided look at a series of storm events, like the 10-year, the 25-year, et cetera, maybe the 100-year. And the model that they used is a model by Hantush, which is the correct model to use. It's referenced in the Mass DEP Stormwater Handbook. However, as we all know, models can produce good results and they can produce bad results, and it all depends on the inputs. So I will assert tonight and provide more details later that 2 of the most important inputs to this model, the Hantush groundwater mounding model, are what's called saturated thickness, and that means how much groundwater is under the site now, and something called hydraulic conductivity. Easier to understand term for that is permeability, how fast groundwater will move through the soils. They used a saturated thickness of 20 feet in their groundwater model. They have 9 test pits on the site that range from a saturated thickness of about 2 feet up to 6 feet. None of them more than 1/3 of the 20 feet that they use in the model. So the model is not conservative. It's under-predicting the groundwater mounding impacts. And standard practice in using this groundwater model is to use a saturated thickness as measured on the site. Therefore, the number they should be using is either 6 or 7 feet, not 20 feet. That's a factor of 3. And then finally, their hydraulic conductivity value, 20.4 feet per day. It's unclear to me from the report how they derive that, but I will just simply say at this point, that seems like a high value to me, given the soils on the site, which have been described as difficult and low permeability to deal with. And I would expect to see a lower hydraulic conductivity than that. So I will stop there, Mr. Chair, and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horsley. I don't have any questions. Do members of the board have questions for Mr. Horsley or Mr. Chessier?
None for me, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I assume that both of the prior witnesses will be providing the board a writing that will summarize their comments.
Yes, that is the plan after we've had the opportunity to do a more thorough review.
Ms. Baptista, anything else?
No, that was all. Thank you very much.
Before I open the hearing to, thank you. Before I open the hearing to public comment, Mr. Reardon, I wonder if you have anything you'd like to add at this time. You don't feel obligated. You're the peer reviewer. I just want to give you an opportunity to be heard if you'd like.
Sure, just a couple brief things. So first and foremost, we have reviewed the materials, at least cursorily, not thoroughly yet, but what I have seen is demonstrably better than what we've gotten in the past. So I want to make sure that that is noted. in my opinion, it demonstrates a much bigger and better command of the task at hand. And I think it's shown in the sort of the extent to which the system has been modified. But in fairness to Jim, I think we're a lot closer to the mark than we have been in the past. That being said, I think, Mr. Chesia and Mr. Horsley bring up interesting comments. I think you'll see comments of a similar note in my letter, as well as some other things. But I do think we're a great deal further along in a feasible system than we were in the last go around. And then to real quickly to Frank's comments, very explicitly, the stormwater standards require you to reduce or equal the amount of peak runoff from your site. So under no circumstances will they be allowed to discharge more stormwater runoff at a peak time than under existing conditions. So just so we're clear on that, they will never be allowed to discharge a higher rate of runoff at a peak time than they currently do. So in terms of the downstream capacity, I think to Jim's point, the logic that the project will not result in a decrease in function of the system is valid, but there are some existing legacy issues that I think need to be looked at, and we can certainly comment on that.
Thank you. Ms. Barron, I wonder if you have anything you'd like to add at this time?
No, I don't, Mr. Chair. Thanks for asking. I think any questions I had have been covered at this point, but thank you for asking.
You're welcome. Questions from the members of the general public?
We do. Amy and Michael McGrath.
Ms. McGrath.
Good evening. This is Michael McGrath.
Mr. McGrath.
So we've lived at 176 Robin Street for 13 years now. And just the thought of being able to dump water into this stream is mind-boggling. And I'm sure Chris is on as well. The stream is I just can't believe they're going to dump water into a private. The stream's on my property and Chris's property, and Mr. Burke is proposing to dump stormwater or runoff, whatever you want to call it, onto the stream. Who's going to maintain the stream 10 years from now? Never mind the basin or the pond that he had, the vernal pond that's being designed. And if it's on private property, I don't understand it. It's mind-boggling to me. And what about snow? And we're all talking about, runoff, but if there's a foot of snow and we get a 50-degree day and there's a massive melt, our homes, the land, the yards flood. The stream is overflowing. Mr. Burke should walk the stream and see what the condition of the stream is, and maybe talk to Corinne at Delphi. He ruined the stream when he did the addition to Delphi. We should walk the stream to look at the stream from what he proposes. Obviously, he hasn't, and I promised my wife I'd be good. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Chris. There's no last name. Chris?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm at 152 Robbins. I'm Mike's neighbor. Yeah, so we have owned quite a bit of that stream. It's about 700 feet, and it's definitely, it tops off during any average rainstorm. The stream is full. We're constantly trying to maintain the rocks that line it for to prevent erosion from coming in and widening it. So definitely a concern to divert more water to it. Also, the hydrologist, I think, pointed out the groundwater that's going to get disturbed by that, couple 100 foot of west facing foundation wall. So that's also going to head that way. And like Mike said, it's private property. Is that something that they're allowed to do? Are they allowed to just override the property owner's concern and we're definitely going to see erosion. We already fight erosion, and it's 700 feet of creek on our property. So that's a big concern. Also, I didn't notice the detention pond on the new architectural drawings. I don't know if it seems like that would have been coordinated tonight, that we could have seen that on the architectural drawings, because with that detention pond, valuable trees will be gone that won't grow there. Big, whatever they are, 60-foot hopeful evergreens. So I don't know why that wasn't coordinated. And I did have a question for it's kind of off topic at this point, but for the landscape architect. So I don't know if I should wait on that. I had my hand raised earlier, but it seems kind of off topic now.
Why don't you raise it? We can get it on the record.
Yeah, the question just was, and maybe I just didn't notice it, but if there's any kind of fencing around the whole site. So whoever ends up living there is going to probably want to go for walks. So I would see Meeting House Lane as being a desirable place to go walk. So I don't know if there's going to be a pathway through there, if they're going to make a pathway through, or if there's a plan to put a fence up. Just the busyness of Blue Hill Ave, people are naturally going to want to go for a walk through Meeting House Lane in these back neighborhoods, I would think. So has that been looked at as a factor?
Yeah, fair enough. Let me thank you, Chris. Is that it? That the extent of your questions?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Let me,
Thank you.
Mr. Schumer, we're going to need to pick this up. I'm not going to close the hearing now, but I'm instead of addressing these questions, I wonder if you might make note of the questions that are coming up, and then we could address them in the next hearing. Might be a little bit more efficient. What you're hearing is some questions on the edge treatment and, what's going on there. There's been a couple questions on fencing. The second question I heard is the issue of private property and the ability to discharge water onto a stream that's on private land. I believe the town is on the record as saying that intermittent stream is only owned by the town down at the bottom as it gets down to Alfred, and we all saw that. And I think Mr. Burke even referred to it. So that's a second question. And then what I heard with respect to the pond, the detention pond, is that it wouldn't be retaining water at its surface except during a storm event. I think that's what Mr. Burke said, which I think may explain the landscaping that we saw on the plan, but it doesn't explain the kind of landscaping. So I heard, it won't be like a golf course, but I think a reasonable question is what kinds of vegetation can live in that environment. So I want people to have an opportunity to ask their questions tonight with the time we have remaining. So, because I can feel that we're going to we're going to return to this next Wednesday. I'll just, if you don't mind, make a note of that, and we can return to that at the time in a more comprehensive way, maybe as you pick up your presentation. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Certainly, Mr. Chair, and I will be taking notes, and I'm sure our architects and engineers are as well.
I had no doubt.
Could we just ask Attorney Schumer to submit those written answers by Friday so people can review them in advance?
If that's possible. I mean, I was expecting him to make a supplemental presentation responding to some of these issues. If it's possible for you to get those in advance, that would be much appreciated. People will have a chance to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think that is possible, Mr. Chair, and I will certainly set that as a deadline for our team to submit something in writing on Friday, to the extent that there is a written response to some of these. One thing I would just point out in terms of specifically this question of putting water onto private property, that calls to mind, to my mind, one of the risks or dangers, I'm not sure what the right word, of having outside consultants in the form of Mr. Chesia and Mr. Horsley offer commentary on a plan like this. And, we respect their opinion about this matter, but in my line of work, I deal with a lot of engineers, and I think I've never met one who hasn't said the phrase, there's always an engineering solution to that problem within about the first minute that I met them. But I didn't hear anything from Mr. Cheshire or Mr. Horsley in terms of what they thought the solution to those problems would be. And the risk of that is, I think, was pretty immediately seen in the first comment from Mr. McGrath, where he said that we would be, I believe his word, dumping water into the stream, which really overlooks the comment that was made by Mr. Reardon just a few moments ago that was reminding the board and the public that the peak runoff rate to that actually has to be less, equal to or less on this plan. So I would, we will attempt to respond to these questions to the extent we can in writing, but I think some of the answers that we have may be revisiting things that have already been said tonight.
As you wish. Anybody else who wishes to be heard?
Yes. Lois Gallagher.
Ms. Gallagher.
Hi, it's Paul Gallagher. I apologize. It's under my wife's name. 45 Alfred Road. I think everybody knows where I live. So without getting too frustrated, to hear Mr. Burke's presentation, I'll try to keep apples to apples, oranges to oranges. Regarding drainage, and Mr. O'Brien brought up the areas of flooding. And I got the impression, perhaps it hasn't been officially put on the record, or Mr. Burke is not comprehending that the intersection of Meeting House and Alfred Road floods. I'm here, my property floods, my property washes away. You can, after any rainstorm, you can come down and look at the drains and see how much debris has come down the hill and is sitting at the corner of the intersection of Meeting House and Alfred. So I just want to get that on the record, that that intersection does flood. My other concern with Mr. Burke's presentation is he said basically only their property would be dumping into the drainage pipe. And I'm going to move over to my oranges regarding the sewer, because it's similar to what I heard the day of the walkthrough when he told us that it would be their property, Delphi, and the houses on Meeting House that would be utilizing the sewer pipe. What I found out after that walkthrough and confirmed with Mr. Berkeley, and I'll follow up with a letter and a map of the sewer, is Barber Lane also dumps into that sewer line. And as we all know, Barber Lane is a steeper and a higher grade. So that adds to the flow as well. And I know we're not discussing sewer tonight, but I just wanted to get that officially on the record. I've been waiting since the walkthrough, but there's been so many delays, I've been unable to do so. So I hope that's okay. So that's my main concerns. I feel a little frustrated that Mr. Burke is not understanding the problems down at the bottom of the hill. I understand that the system was built in the late 60s, early 70s. I think if you remember on the walkthrough, Mr. Berkeley acknowledged there is a problem in the sewer system. I think it was a poorly designed system in the late 60s, early 70s. And I know that's not Mr. Burke's problem, but they bought this property. They want to utilize the infrastructure. I think we have to come up with, we have to inspect the pipes. He can't just say there's no flooding down the end of the street. There is. I've lived here. My family's been here 50 years. So other than that, I'm going to follow up with a letter, but I just wanted to get those couple of things on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Thank you. Anybody else tonight?
The Howards, Stephen Howard.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good evening. I first some comments and a small question. I first wanted to echo what Mr. Gallagher just said, which is that just about every storm there is flooding at the bottom of Meeting House, where Meeting House meets Alfred. So
there obviously would be a concern to see more water coming down that stormwater system. Second thing linked to that is if we are going to tie, the project wants to tie into the stormwater system, they will have to go from their property to the meeting house system, which means right through the trees. And that echoes a comment was Mr. made earlier about the root system of these big trees and the potential damage to those trees. Third comment is in response to what Mr. Burke said about the 40-inch inlet at the bottom of the stream. With some of the overflowing coming, resulting maybe from the fact that it was not maintained properly. I can tell you that my straight onto that inlet. We see DPW come and clean it extremely regularly. And I think my neighbors, the Donahue, would probably confirm that the overflow is regular and does not result from accumulated debris in that system. And lastly, looking at the revised drawing for the water system, the catch basins and various things, one thing which we did have on previous iterations of the project was a drawing showing the catch basins, because we have, I think, 8 different reservoirs, basins, tanks, I don't know what we call them. And I'm really don't quite understand where the water flows from where. And that would certainly help understand how all that articulates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Again, I just want to get on the record. I'm going to follow up with they didn't talk so well.
No, I'm more.
All right, can we just mute, can people who aren't being recognized mute their computers? Thank you. Anybody else like to be heard tonight?
We have several. Miss Eileen Fitzgerald.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome.
Hi, thank you for hearing me. I had 2 quick comments. One is that Mr. Burke repeatedly mentioned that the proposal, the most recent iteration for the stormwater plan meets with certain stormwater guidelines or regulations. And I just wonder if that's sufficient, that their plan can meet those guidelines or regulations when the abutters are already have an overtaxed stormwater effect. We're already experiencing flooding. So meeting certain guidelines might be fine and good under normal circumstances, but the abutters who are downhill from the property, we regularly, as you have heard, experience flooding. So just meeting certain regulations may not be enough to address the problems that we are having, and that may exacerbate the problems that we are having. So that's maybe just a comment, a question, I don't know. But secondly, Mr. Burke was mentioning that some of the stormwater would go into the channel that runs along Robbins Road, I forget the name of that brook, and that would eventually lead into Trout Brook. I'm not sure if it was mentioned at the site walk or not, but many of the neighbors on Alfred Road, we abut Trout Brook. And some of the neighbors, as you go, I believe, west or southwest, away from Robbins Road, those properties get much, much closer to Trout Brook. And those properties experience a great deal of flooding. So adding more water to Trout Brook is going to exacerbate the problems that we are already experiencing south of this property, downhill of this property. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
P. Donahue.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just want to reiterate again what Mr. Howard said, what Mr. Gallagher said, what Mrs. Fitzgerald said. I live up right where that storm drain is in the back. The town does maintain it.
Yeah.
So there is you can't say that they're not cleaning it out. I see them there 2 and 3 times during all storms. They've been wonderful. So this issue of runoff has nothing to do with a clogged drain. So you put that aside. That's not an issue. Okay. The second point I would like to say is, like the other people, putting more water into an already flooded system can't handle it. You're just asking for incredible problems with people's basements, foundations, flooding issues. Not going to happen. And a lot of these things are being created because the plan that we have seen, even though it's been revised twice, still has not addressed the basic concept of what is proposed to be developed up there, with the surface area being paved. The size of the project is just too large to accommodate the area in which it is. So I would like to say the Timposies haven't heard us, but I think they have heard us, and they choose not to respond in a manner that would make this project go forward. Everyone wants to see something developed, but they're not understanding the breadth of what is happening here. That's my comment.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate that. Anybody else?
Yes. Amy? Amy McGrath?
Okay, why don't you move on, Bev?
Okay, yes, we have,
Hi, no, this is Amy. I'm sorry. I'm on a cell phone because I'm on a work trip. Can everyone hear me now?
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to something that the Developers Council noted in his last comments about the peer review reports that were put forth by the Vose Hill Neighborhood Association Group. He indicated that there was no solution offered, and I'm not on the video, so I don't know which consultant said this, but for our behalf, but I think it's pretty clear that he did talk about a solution, which is that, you know, the fact that this is being designed like this is because the project is too large, which is what we've been talking about from day one. We've offered to meet with the developer. It's too large. The stormwater cannot be handled on that site. You know, and to suggest that that our consultant, this is a problem when people are looking at it, as if we don't have a right to do that. If we had listened to the developers' consultants, in particular, Mr. Burke, from day one on this project, we'd have a really, really big problem on our hands, the town would. So, I don't think that was appropriate. And, I think we have added a lot to this project by getting involved. But again, just like Dr. Donahue said, I think it was Dr. Donahue, the developer doesn't listen, doesn't care about what's here. And until they do, the project can't go forward.
Thank you, Ms. McGrath. Anybody else?
Mary Jane Walker?
Hi, thank you. So all of these comments on the stormwater are clearly essential, and they're vital to the conversation here. I just want to take a moment to comment on the architecture that started out this meeting. Over 3,000 Milton residents signed a petition early on when this project was first raised to save the historical property. So clearly this property, the history, everything about it is important to a significant number of people in town. So saving the property, the historical nature of the property, doesn't mean just saving like the bricks of the building and the bricks of the retaining wall of the garden. It's really about the essence of the property. And the massing of this plan completely obliterates you can't look at this property and say to yourself like, oh, wow, what a great historical property, that represents the historical nature of Milton. So I don't want that to be lost here. The home remains completely dwarfed by these outsized buildings. There is no essence of history left at this proposal. So, the proposal claims to save the history, and I just want to, reiterate, highlight that it just doesn't. It does something, but it certainly does nothing to retain just the beautiful history of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else tonight?
There are two panelists with their hands up, Scott Horsley and Caitlin. That's it for the, no more attendees.
I feel like we've heard from the panelists. Okay, Mr. Horsley.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to respond to Mr. Schomer's comment or
We're
question
not
to
going to
me.
do a rebuttal.
It's not a rebuttal. He asked a question. I want to answer it, Mr. Chair, if I may. And I want to thank Amy McGrath for her comment, which is pretty much what I wanted to say. I did offer a solution, and what I offered was what Mr. Burke said. Mr. Burke said that they tried to keep the project out of the buffer zone, but the reason they couldn't, and I quote, it was too large for the site to handle. And that's the bottom line here, and this is important. This project is too large for the site in terms of the amount of stormwater it's going to generate. The stormwater only goes one of two places: across the surface of the land as peak flows or into the groundwater. The groundwater, as I mentioned earlier, is doubling. This is going to cause flooding. I understand that this may not be something you want to hear at this point in time, but the neighbors are interested in this, and they should be. This is a really important issue, Mr. Chairman. And
Mr. Horsley, I want to hear it, but I've heard a lot of it. So please don't accuse me of not being willing to listen. All right.
Well, may I finish then?
You can, but I can't let
Okay.
that comment go unresponded to. I believe I've been extremely patient
Yes.
with this hearing that started in December.
I think so too, but I didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
But you stopped me. I didn't know why you stopped me. But anyways,
I stopped you because
to
you said
finish.
that you wanted to remind me that the neighbors wanted to be heard. And my
Well,
point is, I don't think I need to be reminded. Thank you.
Well, I apologize, sir, but I still think it's worth reiterating what the neighbors are saying here. I think it's an important public comment, and I'm responding to Mr. Schumer's comment that how come we didn't offer a suggestion? And my suggestion is right along the lines of what Mr. Burke said, that the site is too large for the site to handle. And I think that's a really important comment, which goes back to the neighbors' concerns. That's all I wanted to say, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstate it, but I think it's important, and I'll stop. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've heard that point a lot, and you'll have an opportunity to make a written response, and we appreciate your testimony, Mr. Horsley. Anybody else wish to be heard tonight?
No, as far as I can see.
Okay. Mr. Schomer, how would you like to proceed?
Mr. Chair, what we proposed would be at this point to start something of a working session with the peer reviewers. That would be my suggestion to go through the details. We're interested in hearing from Mr. Reardon on the stormwater and Mr. Bomer regarding the new site layout. My understanding from our previous hearings, Mr. Chair, was that the board wanted to hear additional town comments. So my suggestion would be that the next two hearing dates, and if the board is available, the next two Wednesdays, the next two hearings could be for those two purposes, for peer reviewers to come back and for the town comments to be made. And while that is happening, we would be working with the peer reviewers to try to set up that working session. And in terms of the larger picture of the hearing itself, we're very much aware, as I'm sure the board is, that we're coming up on June 8th, which is, as you know, is the deadline to close the hearing. We are willing to extend that in addition to the date for the board's decision. My suggestion in that regard, Mr. Chair, would be something on the order of 4 to 6 weeks an extension. I think that would be a significant amount of time to work through some of these issues that are remaining. So that would be our proposal, Mr. Chair, that we come back next week.
Yeah, so if we come, I'm sorry, Ms. Barrett.
I'm just stunned that someone would suggest 4 to 6 weeks is sufficient, given that we're on hearing 15, I think.
16.
And 16, and the board just now has a plan that may even be possible to talk about. Everything up to this point has been a plan that isn't going to, it wasn't buildable. And we finally are at a point here where we have something that maybe the peer reviewers can say with numerous conditions could go forward. So I just want to make it clear that while I respect and am sympathetic to the situation the neighbors are feeling, I just think everybody needs to understand this board has been unbelievably patient, going through all these hearings, listening to a project with revisions that never made it. And we don't know yet if the plan that's in front of the board now is actually going to be buildable until we see the peer review responses, until we have a construction management plan. We don't know if this is even buildable now. So I think the board's patience with this needs to be acknowledged.
It has been by the chair. That's fine. Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And while I respect and appreciate Mr. Schumer's role as an advocate for his client, and also appreciate the way that he has assisted the board in managing this process and managing the consultants, I am surprised that a 4 to 6 week extension is aggressive, if I may say so. I also am wondering what the impact of the whole Conservation Commission and all of the other issues surrounding the presence of the retention basin in that 100-foot buffer area now, how that all plays in. I have no desire to lengthen this process any longer than it needs to be lengthened. God knows we've had 15 or 16 hearings. However, I am completely in favor of doing it right. And Mr. Chairman, I applaud you for your patience and for your ability to navigate this board in the process as well. But I think you two share my concern, I believe, about not unduly delaying things, making sure that we're fair to all perspectives, but also getting it right. And so, given the amount of work that's left to do here, given the fact that we may just be beginning to land at something that is potentially buildable or maybe not, I think that we have to be realistic here with the amount of time frame and be also mindful of the amount of time it's taken us to get to this point.
Fair enough. Ms. Jaffer, anything you want to add?
I agree that the proposed extension is too short, in part because of something you mentioned, Mr. Chair, at the beginning of the hearing, which is that the open meeting laws may impact whether we're able to go forward virtually. So I think just taking that into account, this regular cadence of meeting every Wednesday may not be realistic over the summer weeks, given people's travel plans and whether that be peer reviewers or, anyone else. So I think, that's just another point that adds to, 4 to 6 weeks just seems unreasonable to fully understand what's being proposed.
Fair enough. Let me.
Jeff, you muted yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Mr. Schumer, I feel like we're still in the middle of this particular round. Let me ask you, do we have all of the written material that goes along with the revised architectural plans and the revised drainage plans? Do we have all the written material at this point?
Yes, you do, Mr. Chair, with the
Okay.
exception only that I can think of at the moment, which would be a revised waiver list, but that would be reductions only
Okay.
from what we had proposed.
Okay, Ms. Barrett, when do you think the peer reviewers will have an opportunity to provide us with comments on these revised materials?
Well, as I informed all the applicants several weeks ago, because of the schedules of the peer reviewers, they need 3 weeks from the date that materials are received by the board to turn around a report. So if Mr. Reardon is able to do it faster than that, that's his call. But everyone was put on notice that they all need 3 weeks because this is not the only thing they're doing.
Okay.
And their only job is reviewing 582 Blue Hill Ave. So, you know, I mean, I would say if everything was finally in hand on Friday, then, you know, I would say 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm trying to, what I'm probing for is the subject of the hearing for the next week or two, probably because that goes to the date that we land on to extend the June 8th date. We may not be able to address that yet. The applicants heard from the board that we don't believe we have enough time for several factors, but I also don't know that we can reach an agreement because I feel like we've got some responses that you need to respond to based upon the input you've got tonight. Then we need to hear from the peer reviewers, and we need to hear from the town. What I'm concerned about is whether or not next Wednesday we'll have enough content to actually get a good hearing in. And, you know, then we're into the first week of June. So let me ask Mr. Reardon if you think whether or not you'd be able to provide us with feedback on the storm water and drainage work next Wednesday.
I should be able to, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be, I therefore like to propose that the hearing next Wednesday be focused on that. And also to feature a follow-up from Mr. Schumer, Mr. Burke, and their team on the questions that were raised today. Mr. Reardon would provide a peer review, and then Ms. Baptista would be able to provide a more robust response to what they've seen next Wednesday, to be followed by the following Wednesday to either hear from additional peer review in the form of the design peer review if we're ready, or potentially some testimony from the town officials, and we can start with the drainage and stormwater. So that's a tentative schedule for the next 2 weeks. And then in next week's hearing, we can decide. Yes, Mr. Reardon.
If I could just ask one thing that hopefully would make our time more productive is if I can work with Jim in the meantime. So concurrently with formalizing my comments in a letter, also work for Jim so that potentially next week we can have responses in an intended strategy for how they're going to address my comments at that time.
Yeah,
I'd be able to do that.
I think that's good. I mean, I also would say, Mr. Reardon, I think the board is less interested right now in a written product and more in your reaction. So even if you were able to provide us with your observations to be followed up by a written report, that would be fine. But I want to take advantage of the testimony we've heard today, the concerns of the neighbors, which, you know, I mean, there's 2 or 3 major themes that have emerged that, you know, frankly, I'm a little frustrated that we haven't addressed them yet, or they haven't been addressed because we've heard them over and over for quite a while, actually, you know, the same 2 or 3, 4 or 5 same types of things. So we want to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, I think we're in a good position finally to start getting into that. I think the other things that we've been dealing with until now were even more important than those.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So now I think we're at a good spot where we understand the site and how it could work. Now we can look at what's happening downstream as well.
Okay. And when I say this, I mean, focusing on the drainage and the stormwater, I know we've spent a lot of time on that tonight. it's not to say that we're moving off from the design review. I know there was a comment on that tonight, so that's also important, and we will get to that in the both the town review and the peer review. And then Mr. Schomer, what we'd expect, we'll make a decision on. We'll come to an agreement on an extension, but I think you get the sense of the board is that the 4 to 6 weeks is not likely to be enough to get this done. Not because we want to elongate a hearing that began in December of 2020, but because I think the issues do demand that we take the time to get it right. And I think we all agree with that. So I wonder if there's any comments on that proposal.
From us, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I hear what the board members are saying, and I hear what Ms. Barrett is saying. At this time, the applicant is agreeable to a 6-week extension. What we typically prefer to do from the applicant side in a hearing like this is to keep a hearing like this on a short leash, as it were, because I think that if you start extending out the hearing by longer than 4 to 6 weeks, you end up in a holding pattern, I think, and focusing really on issues that, as I mentioned before, are primarily more within the province of the Conservation Commission to address. And we're aware that a lot of these issues are of great concern to the neighbors, and we're sensitive to that. But frankly, a lot of these issues are really better dealt with before the Conservation Commission with respect to the stormwater issues. So I'll say again tonight, we're willing to agree to 6 weeks at this time. If farther along in this hearing, it appears that we're moving in the right direction and that talks are productive between the applicant and the peer reviewers, and we're moving towards something that the board is comfortable with and the applicant is comfortable with, and hopefully the neighbors as well, there may come a time when we would be willing to extend it further. But at this time, we're not.
Okay, we'll address that next week.
Well,
let me say that, let me remind people that effective June 15, the state of emergency will be over. We'll be back in open session at Town Hall or at the Senior Center, pending a change. So to Ms. Joffa's point, I want to be mindful of that and the demands that will have on people's times to keep the cadence of this hearing. So let me ask if there's any other, let me ask if the members, if they've got a comment on the scope of the next 2 hearings.
Chairman, I think that you've laid out a very good, a very logical plan, and I'm sure that it will keep us on a short leash over the next 2 weeks.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Joffer.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Any other further business before the board tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
This hearing will be in recess till next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Good night.
Thank you very much.
You're